Hey, stories of the Soul Fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us. The Grayson estate was a palace of glass and steel perched above the Hudson River, where chandeliers burned until dawn and silence itself felt expensive. The patriarch, Alexander Grayson, was a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom from New York to Zurich. His empire of shipping, real estate, and finance was the kind of legacy most families could only dream of. But for all the billions stacked neatly in his accounts, his greatest pride lay in his only son, Michael Grayson. Michael had been raised with the best tutors, the finest schools, and a roadmap of his life carved out before he was old enough to write his own name. Harvard business, then a seat at the board, marriage to a woman of equal wealth and pedigree, children groomed to inherit not just a fortune, but an empire. At least, that was Alexander's vision. But life rarely followed blueprints. Michael first saw Elena Carter on a rain-soaked afternoon in Brooklyn. He had ducked into a small neighborhood cafe after a long day of meetings, his tailored suit damp at the cuffs. The place was nearly empty except for her, a woman bent over a sketch pad by the window, strands of dark hair falling loose across her cheek. She wasn't like anyone in Michael's world of marble floors and designer gowns. She wore simple jeans, a faded jacket, and her shoes were worn at the edges. Yet there was something about her, the intensity in her gaze, the way she seemed to drink in the world around her as though every detail mattered. When she looked up, their eyes met. For a moment, the city noise faded. He ordered a coffee, but instead of leaving, he lingered, drawn by an invisible thread. Eventually, he crossed the room and asked what she was drawing. She hesitated, then turned the sketchpad toward him. It was a charcoal rendering of the rain hitting the cafe window, each droplet alive with movement. "It's beautiful," he murmured. She gave a soft laugh. "It's just rain, not the way you see it." And that was the start. Over the following weeks, Michael found excuses to visit that cafe again and again. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Other times they sat in silence, her sketching, him working on his laptop. He learned her name, Elena, that she lived in a tiny walk-up apartment and worked evenings at a bookstore to cover rent, that her mother had died young and her father, a mechanic, had raised her with more love than money. Elena, in turn, learned that Michael was wealthy, though he downplayed the scale. He told her about his love for architecture, his secret wish to build rather than inherit. She teased him for being too serious. He teased her for caring too much about stray cats she always stopped to feed. It was natural, effortless, terrifying. One evening, as they walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, Michael took her hand. "Elena," he said softly, "I think I've been waiting to meet you my whole life." Her breath caught, and for a moment she let herself believe it, but deep inside she knew. Love across such a gulf never came without a price. The truth came crashing down the night Michael finally brought her to the Grayson estate. Alexander Grayson greeted her with a stare so cold it could have frozen glass. The dinner table stretched endlessly, covered in polished silver, and yet Elena felt small under his gaze. "So," Alexander said, swirling his wine, "you're the young woman who has captured my son's attention." Elena straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir." He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "And what exactly do you do, Miss Carter?" "I'm an artist. I also work at a bookstore." The silence that followed was suffocating. "An artist," Alexander repeated, as though tasting something sour. "Tell me, do you plan to support my son with sketches of coffee cups and rain?" Michael's fork clattered against his plate. "Father?" But Alexander raised a hand. His gaze burned into Elena's, dissecting her. "You're not suitable. My son is heir to a billion-dollar empire. He requires a partner who understands duty, legacy, and sacrifice. Not—" His eyes swept over her plain dress. "A distraction." Elena's cheeks flamed, but she refused to look away. "With all due respect, sir, Love isn't a business transaction. For the first time, Alexander laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. That's where you're wrong. In my world, everything is a transaction. Michael stood, fury simmering. If you can't respect her, I won't stay under this roof. But Alexander's final words that night carved themselves into Elena's memory. You can play at love, son, but mark me. This girl will never be part of this family. Not while I live. After that night, Michael and Elena met in secret, their bond growing even as the shadow of his father's disapproval loomed. Elena sometimes wondered if she should walk away, if sparing Michael the choice would be the greatest act of love she could give. But then he'd look at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully scripted world, and she couldn't let go. Still, what Elena didn't know was that Alexander wasn't finished. He was already setting plans in motion, schemes to test her, to expose her, to prove once and for all that she wasn't worthy of his son. And what Alexander didn't know was that Elena had secrets of her own, truths about her past that, once revealed, would shake the foundation of the Grayson family forever. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Michael paced his penthouse suite in Manhattan, torn between fury and despair. He had seen his father dismiss rivals, crush competitors, and bend governments with a single phone call. But never had Alexander's cruelty felt so personal. This time, it wasn't about business. It was about Elena. Elena, meanwhile, tried to put on a brave face. She assured Michael she could handle his father's contempt. But late at night, alone in her little apartment, she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, her heart heavy. She had always known they came from different worlds. She just hadn't realized how sharp the divide would feel when that world slammed its gates shut in her face. Alexander Grayson was not a man who left matters unresolved. If Michael insisted on chasing this infatuation, then Alexander would expose the girl for what she truly was, beneath them. He called upon his trusted aide, Victor Hale, a man who had worked for the Grayson family for decades. I want her tested, Alexander ordered. Every person has a price. Find hers. Then, my son will see the truth. Victor hesitated. And if she doesn't have a price, sir? Alexander's lips curled. Everyone does. A week later, Elena received an unexpected opportunity. A prestigious gallery in Manhattan was offering to feature her sketches in an upcoming showcase. The invitation arrived through an elegant letter delivered to her bookstore job. Elena's heart soared. She had always dreamed of her art being seen, being valued. She rushed to tell Michael, who beamed with pride and promised to be at her side. But what Elena didn't know was that the gallery offer was no coincidence. It was Alexander's carefully staged trap, a chance to see if she would seize fame, fortune, and independence at the cost of her relationship with his son. As the showcase approached, subtle doubts began to worm their way into Elena's life. Strangers approached her at the bookstore, praising her talent and suggesting she could go far if she left behind distractions. A wealthy patron offered to sponsor her career in Europe, with the unspoken implication that Michael, and all he represented, would hold her back. Michael noticed the way Elena grew quieter, her eyes distant. "What's wrong?" he asked one night as they walked through Central Park. She hesitated before answering. "What if your father's right? What if I'm not enough for you? You're born into a legacy, Michael. I'm just a girl who sketches rain on cafe windows." He stopped, pulling her close. "Elena, listen to me. You're the only thing in my life that feels real. If you think I'd trade that for money or power, you don't know me at all." Her eyes softened, but the seed of fear had already been planted. What Alexander didn't realize, what Elena had never confessed to Michael, was that she wasn't entirely the poor bookstore girl she appeared to be. Her father, the mechanic who had raised her, had once worked for the Grayson family decades ago. He had left under mysterious circumstances after a bitter falling out with Alexander himself. Elena had heard whispers, but her father never spoke of it. The truth, if revealed, could shatter everything, both her relationship with Michael and the empire Alexander clung to so fiercely. The gallery glittered with chandeliers and laughter, the city's elite swirling in gowns and tuxedos. Elena stood nervously by her collection, dressed in a borrowed black dress that made her look both elegant and fragile. Michael held her hand, refusing to let her out of his sight. Then, like a shadow, Alexander appeared. He greeted the room with effortless charm before turning his gaze on Elena. His words were polite, but his eyes were knives. "Impressive," he said, gesturing to her work. "It seems you do have talent, after all. Tell me, Miss Carter, if offered a future among the world's greatest artists, would you take it, even if it meant leaving everything else behind?" The room quieted, the question hanging heavy. Elena felt every eye on her. She glanced at Michael, whose grip on her hand tightened, and in that moment she realized the trap. Her answer could decide not just her future, but the fate of her love. The gallery seemed to hold its breath. Crystal glasses stilled in midair, murmurs faded into silence, and Elena felt the weight of Alexander's question crush her chest. If offered a future among the world's greatest artists, would you take it, even if it meant leaving everything else behind? Michael's eyes begged her to see through it, to realize his father's challenge for what it was. But Alexander's gaze was cold, unyielding, daring her to reveal her true loyalties. Elena inhaled slowly, her palms clammy, her mind racing. She could almost hear her father's voice in the back of her mind. "The Graysons will always test you. Stand firm." And then her lips parted. "I would take nothing," she said clearly, her voice trembling yet strong. "Not fame, not fortune, not a name in lights, if it meant losing the man I love." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Michael's chest swelled with emotion, but Alexander's jaw hardened. "You're a fool," he said softly, but with venom. "A poor girl clinging to dreams that will starve you." "Or maybe," Elena replied, her voice steadier now, "you're the fool for believing love has a price." For the first time in years, Alexander was left speechless. The night ended with applause for Elena's courage, not just for her art, but for her answer. Patrons whispered about her defiance, and some even admired her conviction. But Alexander was far from finished. Back in his limousine, he seethed, his fingers drumming the leather seat. "She plays her role well," he muttered to Victor Hale. "But I know she's hiding something. Everyone hides something." Victor nodded carefully. "Shall I dig deeper into her past?" "Yes," Alexander snapped. "I want every scrap of her life uncovered. There's a reason she clings to Michael so desperately. I'll find it. And when I do, she'll regret ever setting foot in our world." In the days that followed, Elena tried to focus on her art, on her moments with Michael. But unease gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the memory of Alexander's eyes, sharp, probing, like he could see into her very soul. And beneath that fear lay a secret she had never told Michael, that once, long ago, her father had been tied to the Grayson Empire. Late one night, she sat by her sketchbook, unable to sleep. Michael noticed her silence and touched her shoulder. "You've been distant," he whispered. "What's going on?" Elena hesitated. The truth hovered on her lips. "Tell him. Tell him before his father finds out." But fear sealed her mouth. She kissed him instead, desperate to drown her worry in the warmth of his love. Meanwhile, Victor Hale's search led him to a dusty file buried in the archives of Grayson Industries. The name leapt out immediately. Thomas Carter, Elena's father. Thomas had once been a trusted engineer in Alexander's automotive division. Brilliant with machines, respected by workers, But decades ago, he had left abruptly after a violent dispute with Alexander himself. The file ended abruptly, but whispers among old employees told a darker story. Thomas had accused Alexander of sabotaging a project to edge out a rival, risking workers' safety in the process. When Thomas refused to stay silent, Alexander destroyed his career. And now, fate had circled back. Victor brought the file to Alexander. The billionaire's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Ah, so the girl is his daughter. No wonder she despises me. No wonder she clings to Michael. It's revenge wrapped in romance. Victor frowned. Or maybe it's just love. Alexander glared at him. Love doesn't exist, Victor, only ambition. And I'll prove it. To my son. To her. To everyone. That weekend, Alexander invited Elena and Michael to his mansion once more. The invitation came under the guise of burying old grievances, but Elena's heart tightened as they drove through the iron gates. She knew something was coming. She could feel it in the coldness of the air, the way Alexander's eyes flickered when they entered. Dinner began quietly, almost pleasantly. Then Alexander set down his glass, folded his hands, and looked directly at Elena. "Tell me, Miss Carter," he said smoothly, "how is your father? Thomas, wasn't it? The mechanic who once accused me of being a criminal?" The room froze. Michael's fork clattered to his plate. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The secret she had buried so carefully was out in the open, dragged into the light.